Hello, global gardeners. It's great to see you here with time changes and changing weather and all the other things that get on our way sometimes, but we're here. It's Monday, and let's talk about seeds today. First off, I want to give a shout out to Brent Sedgwick, who's joining us for the first time on a live, and Riverdale Gardens is able to join us today. Having a day off really is a good thing, especially when you can spend some time in the Gardner Scott community. And Jan, Ron, and Arthur, I'm glad you're here today, but sorry to hear that the walking pneumonia is the reason you're joining us. Regardless of why you're here, sit back, enjoy maybe a nice cup of hot tea, and let's talk about seeds over the course of the next 90 minutes. Thanks at the beginning to Jay and Heidi, of course, our wonderful moderators as we proceed. So there are so many things with gardening that we can learn at so many levels. One of the things I think that actually is a topic, an experience, an exercise, a task, maybe even a passion that gets us to a new level of gardening is saving seeds. And fall typically is the time of year that we're going to be saving most of our garden seeds. But of course, depending on the plant, you might want to start your seed saving in spring through the summer, and then, of course, finish up the garden season with seed saving in fall. So, those are the topics that we'll be talking about today. Give me your questions, any concerns, and of course, I want to hear from you who have been saving seeds over the course of your gardening journey, and give us some of your tips to help all of us on that journey. When we start our seeds, there are some basic things that the seeds need. I've talked about this before. For a seed to germinate, all it needs is heat, water, oxygen, and as it starts growing, a little bit of light. That's what it takes to germinate a seed. So when we're starting in springtime, when I got my tomatoes and peppers, I typically will put them on a heat mat, but the normal air temperature is all that's necessary. And then they need the moisture. So you put them into some type of medium and water it, and that's going to stimulate the germination as well. And when the seedling emerges, I already have my lights set up and the seedling is all ready to go. Why do I talk about seed starting? Well, think about the things that a seed needs to germinate. And when we save our seeds, we want to remove all of those things. So when we store our seeds, we want to store them in a cool, lack of warmth, dark, lack of light, dry, lack of moisture environment. Keep that in the back of your mind as we proceed today, because saving and storing seeds is that simple. Cool, dark, and dry is all you need. If we eliminate any one of those, it lessens the probability that our seeds are going to store well. When we collect our seeds, one of the factors that I like to look for in collecting the seeds is to get a jump start on that storing process by collecting dry seeds from the plants. The seeds need to be fully mature so that they'll be viable the next time we want to germinate them. One of the best ways to ensure that maturity is to just leave the seeds on the plant for as long as possible. Or to make sure that we're using a ripe fruit when we harvest our seeds and save them for later. So I'll be touching on that. Definitely want to hear about your experiences. Eva Nichols Art says, I've been collecting wildflower seeds since the summer for my wildflower garden, and I'm establishing in my former front lawn. Great idea. And that's why I say we can collect seeds through the season, spring, summer, and fall. The focus is most often on the fall, hence why I'm covering this topic today. But I've done the same thing. As the flowers reach the point where they're producing seed and the seed begins to dry on that flower, that's when you're harvesting the seeds. And that may be in the spring for those spring bloomers. It may be in the summer for those summer bloomers. And then, of course, it may be in the fall for the fall bloomers. Go ahead and collect the seed from your flowers throughout your gardening season. And this, again, takes us to a next level of gardening because the focus tends to be in the fall. It tends to be with a focus on our vegetable gardens. So we harvest that nice ripe tomato to collect the seeds, or we have that ripe squash to collect the seeds. If you want to be saving your wildflower seeds, it might be too late to do it in fall. So make note of that for next year. If you missed the right time to save some of the seeds that you want, do it next year. Right now, I've got some flowers that I'm collecting seeds from. They're not wildflowers, but I have pansies and petunias in my green stock vertical tower, along with some snapdragons and dianthus. They've done so well this year. I put them in those towers about 5 months ago now. Haven't done anything, and they're still blooming. Even when exposed to the freezes and the snows that I've had in the last couple weeks, the flowers are still colorful. I love those flowers. I try to grow them as often as possible, but I've never really done a precise focus on growing those plants. I'm going to do that next year. In recent weeks, I've talked about planning for your next season during the current season. Well, next year, I'm going to have petunias and pansies everywhere in my landscape because they just fill the landscape with color throughout the entire season. One way to do that is to save the seeds. So all of those flowers that are in my green stock tower right now, as they begin to dry, as they're producing those seeds, I'm saving them. Now, you have a couple options when it comes to saving your seeds, particularly your wildflower seeds or your annual flower seeds. You can save just the flowers that you want. So for instance, the petunias that I want to save, I'll save those petunia seeds, and then I can put those seeds in an envelope, or I can sow them in my garden in fall. That's a wonderful option. That's what I like to do. Or you can go ahead and make your own wildflower mix. So as you're collecting the seeds, go ahead and mix them up. So I do this with my calendula, my echinacea, my rudbeckia. Those are wonderful flowers that I grow throughout the season. Those flowers are going to start fading and setting seed during the summer. And so when it comes to the rudbeckia and the purple coneflower and the black-eyed Susan flowers, I'm collecting those seeds and I'm putting them into the same envelope or the same bag. So when it comes time to sow them in my landscape, I'll just take a pinch or a handful and just throw them out in an open spot that doesn't have any flowers yet. I know those plants will do well in my landscape because they're flowering and producing seeds. And so why not sow a few hundred seeds of each, hoping for germination of maybe a handful to help fill in an area. And I like having the mix of some purple flowers right next to the yellow flowers, maybe with some white flowers. So by mixing up your own wildflower mix or annual mix from the flowers that you've been growing in your landscape, you're just spreading to a new area. And as long as you've got the space to do it, I say do it. I think that's one of those things that we too often think we have to buy seeds from the store, from the nursery, from an online source. You really don't. Once you find a plant that does well in your garden, go ahead and save the seed. Tell the truth is asking, I'm sorry if I missed the answer to my question, but do you ever freeze seeds in vacuum seals to save? So, good question. And this is on my list of things to talk about when we're storing our seeds. So, the simple to the answer to that question is no, because I don't think it's necessary. Now, uh, I will freeze many things from my garden as a method of preservation, but I'm not a big fan of freezing seeds. And here's why. So the video that you may have seen last year that I did, I was able to tour the seed vault up in Fort Collins, Colorado. It's the National Seed Vault, hundreds of thousands of samples of seeds. I made a video about that tour. In that seed vault, the large majority of seeds that they are saving are refrigerated, not frozen. Now, I do show in that video that there are some seeds and some cellular structures that they will freeze. But what they're doing is they're doing a flash freezing process. So they freeze those genetics very quickly, and then they store them in liquid nitrogen containers so that they are extremely cold with a very consistent temperature. And so when you look at how the seed bank stores their seeds when they freeze them, it's important to recognize how they freeze them very, very quickly and how they store them at a very, very cold, consistent temperature. So is your freezer really capable of duplicating those conditions? And most of us, it's really not the case. Our freezer might get down to 0 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about minus 18 Celsius. And that's good, but that's not best. It really should be much, much colder than that. And what kind of refrigerator freezer do you have? Many of the newer freezer models that are part of our refrigerator have a cycle to reduce the amount of frost in the freezer. So there's actually a fluctuation of temperature in the freezer. It warms up and then it freezes. Then it warms up, then it freezes to help eliminate those frost conditions. That's really bad for the storage of the seed. So, have a seed that gradually froze, and when food or seeds gradually freeze, you have water crystals that will build up inside them. And then you have essentially a freeze-thaw cycle where it's warming and cooling and warming and cooling. And so those water crystals inside that seed can actually cause some cellular damage inside that seed. So for all those reasons, a freezer is really not the best place to store most of the seeds that we're saving from our garden. And then, as I said in the beginning, I don't think it's necessary. As long as you have a cool, dry, dark location, your seeds will remain viable for years. What's the best cool, dry, dark location that you have? Well, it could be your refrigerator, not your freezer. So I actually do a lot of storing in my refrigerator where the temperature is consistently below 40 degrees Fahrenheit. And 40 degrees is a nice number. That's 4.5 degrees Celsius. That's a good target for storing your seeds so that they remain viable and they don't germinate. Well, your refrigerator has those conditions. So go ahead and store in your refrigerator. And refrigerators, surprisingly, have a pretty low humidity in most cases. That's also good for storage. And once the door is closed, the light's off. That's the third thing on the list to try to do. So if you want to store your seeds for longer terms, consider your refrigerator rather than your freezer. And as to the vacuum seal, uh, honestly, I'm just a little lazy when it comes to some of that. And I don't think it's necessary that you vacuum seal. If you live in a very humid environment and you're concerned about the high humidity during storage of your seed, then that is a situation that I would suggest freeze sealing in a package with some desiccant in it to help dry out the air inside that bag. But generally, when I'm saving my seeds, I'm going to be using them within the next year, maybe 2 years. And so I'm not that concerned about long-term storage. If you're saving with the intent of 4 or 5 years from now using those seeds, then yes, you can take some of those extra steps for long-term storage to include putting them into a bag that you have freeze sealed and has some lower humidity kind of built into that process. That's the approach I take to seed starting, because, and I've talked about this in some of my videos, I follow a pattern of saving seeds. So for instance, my black crim tomatoes, one of my favorites. I talk about them relatively often when it comes to favorite plants that we grow. I will save black crim tomato seeds, and then I will use those seeds for a 2 to 3 year cycle. In the third year, I save more black crim seeds and start a whole new cycle. And I do that with whatever I'm saving. If I'm saving my cayenne pepper seeds, it's the same thing. Generally, on a 3 year cycle, I save all new seeds. So I'm saving seeds, using those seeds I save for 3 years, every year for those 3 years. And then I get a fresh batch to start all over again. Most of the seeds that we're going to be saving can last for 2 to 3 years without any problem. Onion seeds are notorious for not storing for very long. So in my video on how long seeds last and how long they can be stored for, I mentioned that onion seeds, it's generally agreed, last 1 to 2 years. Why is there a range when we talk about how long seeds last? So when you buy seeds, those seeds are probably at least a year old by the time you put them into soil before you start trying to grow them. It was the previous year, at a minimum, that they saved those seeds and then packaged those seeds and then sent those seeds to the market and then sold them to you. So if you buy onion seeds, they're probably at least 1 year old, maybe even older. So if you're going to save them for a whole extra year, you might get 2 years out of them from when they were harvested. For you, that's only 1 year because the seeds are a year old. You save them for 1 year, and then beyond that, they might not be very viable. If you save your own seeds to use again, save your seeds, say, from this year. Next year, when you put them in the garden, they're only going to be 1 year old. The year after that, they'll be 2 years old, and you can start a 2 year cycle with something like onion seeds. It's not that hard. It's just something you need to build into your normal fall gardening activities or your normal summer pruning and deadheading activities about saving seeds. Pat, thank you so much for that. I do appreciate you so very much. Onion seeds versus sets for fall planting. So since I was just talking about onion seeds, I think this actually fits pretty well. When I have those 2 year old seeds or those seeds that I bought to start this year, for instance, so let's say back in March, I bought onion seeds. And well, no, it would have been earlier than that. I usually start my onions in January. So back in December, I bought my onion seeds. I started the seeds in January and February to then put into my garden in April. That's my normal timeline. Okay. So now at the end of the season, I have a pack of seeds from last December. So I know they're at least a year old, probably closer to 2 years old. And so what am I going to do with those seeds? They might not be viable next year, or not as viable as a new round of seeds. I'll take those seeds and just sprinkle them on a bed that I'm planning to grow onions in fall. And I essentially let Mother Nature decide when those seeds are going to sprout and how well they're going to do. That's the approach I took at the Galileo School Garden, and it was extremely effective. In fact, it was actually too effective. So I would follow a 2-year cycle with my onion seeds at the Galileo Garden. Onions are biennial, so you'll start growing the plant in the first year, then you need to let it overwinter. And then in the second season, it'll send up its flower stalk and you'll have seeds. And I have a video on how to harvest onion seeds. Well, if you sow those seeds in fall, you can expect a bunch of them to pop up in spring. And at the school garden, because I was on a 2-year cycle saving the seeds from the flowers, I would let the students do it. Inevitably, getting the schedule right with students in the garden at the same time that the seeds needed to be harvested, it didn't always match. So hundreds, thousands of those onion seeds would fall to the ground before they could be collected. Every spring, I had hundreds of onion plants pop up in those beds. So the fall sowing is extremely effective, assuming that you've got the bed all ready to go, the soil's ready to go, and that you don't have an animal that might be wanting to eat all those onion seeds. I don't know that birds are particularly fond of onion seeds, but even in that case, if you're putting a lot of onion seeds out there, you can expect that you're going to get the onion plant. And so come spring, you got onions. Now, let's talk about the sets. That same basic process of starting the onion seed early and then allowing it to grow and then moving those plants out to the garden as an onion transplant is very effective. And so when we go buy sets from a nursery in particular, that's what's been done. When was the last time you bought a set of onion plants from a nursery or a garden center? Chances are they looked pretty dry. They were shriveled up, and you put them in the garden, you water them, and they'll grow. You'll get it. It just takes a little while for them to become established. Well, those onion sets, those plants were grown months before you put them in the garden. So effectively, many of them, depending on your source, might be 6, 8, 9, even more months old. They've already gone through that first season, so that when you put them in the garden, they will mature more quickly and give you the bulb you're looking for. When you start from seed, particularly fall sowing, and it's going to sprout in spring, it might not be enough time, depending on your garden climate, to get a big bulb by the end of the season. So that's the trade-off, is if you grow from seed, especially with the fall sowing of the seeds, you might not get a big bulb the following year. If you put a plant in from a set that you buy, the onion sets, you're more likely to get the bulb. Even with fall planting of those sets, it's going to overwinter, and then that second season, it's going to give you that big burst of growth towards maturing. So how much time do you have? How much effort do you want to take? Both of them will work. And fall planting can be effective for both. It's just a question of how old those seeds are and how old those sets are when you put them in the ground, and whether you grew them yourself or not. So one year I did do that, where I had some onion sets that I had grown myself, and I put them in the ground in fall. Shallots, perfect example. You really should be putting your shallots in the ground in fall. The next year, I had some of the biggest onion bulbs I've ever grown. So putting them in for that fall growth, and then in spring, they can already start growing. That's the way to get a big bulb. But if you're growing green onions or you want smaller bulbs, then the spring planting or using the seeds really can be the way to go. Okay, let's see. I know I've missed some things, but I'll try to catch up. Bowtie Life in the Garden, good to have you here today. I've always had trouble with the idea of freezing my seeds. Thank you for clarifying that whole idea. Oh, you're very welcome with that. The cold isn't necessary. It's better. And then, as I mentioned, the freezing, I don't recommend. So if you don't want to store your seeds in the refrigerator, if you put them in a closet that is cool, it's perfectly fine as well. And actually, most of the seeds, because I have hundreds of packets of seeds, I've shown that in videos before, most of my seeds are actually being stored down in my basement where it's cool and dry and dark. There's only select seeds that I will store in my refrigerator, and most of those are the ones that require cold stratification. So let's talk a little bit about that. So to germinate, talked about the necessary things that a seed needs. The temperature can be very important for a large number of seeds. So particularly perennial plants, perennial flowers. Think about how a perennial plant is growing, those flowers that I mentioned earlier. So when I'm collecting the calendula and the echinacea and the rudbeckia and spreading them out through my garden in fall, I'm replicating the way those plants grow in the landscape. They will flower in the summer, they'll drop their seeds in the fall, they'll remain dormant over the course of the winter. And then in the spring, when the conditions are right, those seeds will germinate. Well, if you buy those same seeds that were collected by a seed grower and sold to you online, and then you start those seeds in spring, you might not get a good level of germination because many of the perennial plants that we're growing require exposure to cold temperatures for them to wake up and germinate in springtime. And so for a lot of those perennial flowers that I'm growing or planning to grow, I'll store them in the refrigerator because the refrigerator is giving them the cold temperatures that seed needs to register. So then when I start those seeds indoors in spring, they'll germinate. And you can noticeably see the difference. I've done some, just my own small level experimentation with side-by-side testing of the same seeds, some that were cold stratified and some that weren't. The germination rates are clearly better for those seeds that need the cold stratification. So that is an instance where I would definitely store in the refrigerator, but they don't need freezing temperatures. Just those temperatures below 40 degrees, 4.5 Celsius, and the seeds will do just fine. So think about that as you're putting all of these pieces together. Lawrence, hello to you. I was having trouble getting cilantro to grow, and when I found a batch that worked, I saved the seeds from that batch for use. Great idea, great tip. And so when I talk about saving the seeds that do well in your garden, this is exactly my point. So often we have trouble with a particular plant, maybe cilantro. When you finally get the plant that does well in your garden, those are the seeds you should be saving. Absolutely. Try to avoid saving the seeds of the plants that don't do well in your garden, because If you save them and plant them, they probably won't do well in the next year. But because black Krim tomatoes do so well in my garden, that's why they're so high on my list of seeds to save, along with so many other seeds that I save. They do well. And so I add them to my cycle to ensure that I'm always growing seeds from that particular line. Those genetics found a home in my garden, and I'm definitely going to keep them in my garden. So I love that approach. And that really is something that you should consider when it comes to choosing the seeds you save. And so if you haven't saved seeds before, start with your favorites. What did best in your garden? So many of us right now have tomatoes, maybe the last harvest of the year. And so eat those tomatoes, enjoy them, but save some of the seeds during the process of putting them into a salad or however you're using your tomatoes. Save some of those seeds now and grow them next year. It's the same with the peppers. I had such a wonderful pepper year this year that as I've been preparing my peppers to make into paprika or to pickle them, I'm saving some of those seeds because those did so well. Those are the seeds that I'm going to grow for next year. Because I'm growing those plants again, might as well use the seeds that I know did well this year. That's a basic approach that really can make a big difference in the success that you have. Tell the Truth is asking, do you place those refrigerator seeds in a mason jar? No, I just leave them in paper envelopes. The thing about the dryness, so refrigerators typically are low in humidity, but depending on what you're putting in your refrigerator, you can raise the humidity level within your refrigerator. So I allow my seeds to go into paper envelopes primarily so that they can kind of breathe, so that if there is a modification of the humidity within the refrigerator, being in that envelope, maybe the paper will absorb some of the humidity, but air can still get in and out. And it's the dry air within the refrigerator that I really want to maintain the storage ability for those seeds. So a mason jar is certainly an option, but the problem with plastic and glass jars in a potentially humid environment like a refrigerator is that once that humid air gets inside the jar, it isn't as readily going to move out of the jar. So you could inadvertently increase the humidity level inside a mason jar that you're storing your seeds in. Now, outside the refrigerator, I do store in jars. And I show this in some of my storage videos. I use jars a lot for those seeds that I'm saving in my basement, where the humidity is much more consistent and I'm not worried about a high humidity environment inside that jar. But if I've got a lot of seeds that I'm putting in a jar, I'll put a desiccant package in. I've mentioned that in some of my videos. I'll just take those little packages that you get in your electronics that you buy, and I'll throw those into a jar of seeds just to help eliminate or at least alleviate any problems with humidity that might develop inside the jar. Okay, let's see. Yeah, and Owen says put desiccant in the fridge if you're that moist. So that's definitely the approach I take. Serena says we're getting a lot of rain since Friday night. We've gotten at least 4 inches and we're projected to get 6 inches or more total. Wow. By the end of today, with more chances on Thursday. Wind should. And so I'm guessing what you're asking, and I was going to talk about this as well on my list of things. When do you harvest the seeds? So I've been exposed to a lot of snow lately. This is a picture of my garden this morning. And so there's snow on the ground now. It had melted yesterday. It will probably melt tomorrow. And then we've got a huge amount of snow that's coming in Wednesday and Thursday. So when do you harvest seeds? If you haven't harvested your seeds yet, especially since we want dry seeds as much as possible, I wait until it's been dry, if I can, to harvest my seeds. So if you still have seeds on your plants and there's a lot of rain, you've got a couple of options, but you can wait. Even if it's a lot more rain coming, if it's going to dry out, then let it dry out on the plant. The sun is so effective at drying out the seed pods and making those seeds dry enough that you can get a good start on the storage process. If it's going to rain, if you live in one of those regions where you just have rain all the time and it's not going to dry out, then go ahead and harvest. Once they've reached that maturity on the plant, once they've hit that browning on the plant, even if it's not dry, you can still bring them indoors and then continue the drying process. And so I do that with a lot of seeds at this time of year. If I'm in seed saving mode and I've had a lot of snow and the humidity has been a little bit higher than typical for my Colorado region, I'll still go ahead and collect those seeds. I'll bring them indoors and I'll just lay them out on sheets of newspaper. The newspaper will absorb some of that moisture. My indoor dry air will start absorbing the rest of that moisture. And that's the nice thing about furnaces and air conditioners, is they tend to dry the air. So in your house is one of the best places to actually start drying your seeds. Air drying is effective for most seeds. So go ahead and just spread them out on a sheet of paper or a plate, a dish, whatever you happen to have, and start the drying process. What you want to avoid, particularly if you're harvesting the seeds and it's been a lot of rain and a lot of high humidity, is you want to avoid those seeds clumping together. You don't want to put them into a bowl where they're all touching, because now mold can develop. And with mold, you start getting rot. So that's why I spread them out, so that all of the seeds have full air around them. They're not touching at all. And then you just wait. There's been times that I've brought seeds in and a month will go by, maybe even 2 months will go by. I'll set up a table in a spare room, lay out the newspaper, spread out the seeds, and then I'll come back to them when I know they are dry, because they've been sitting for a couple weeks. One of the worst things you can do when you're trying to store your seeds is to start storing your seeds before they're completely dry. If you put your seed into the refrigerator, or if you put your seed into a glass jar in your basement and it's not dry yet, you're asking for trouble. It's adding moisture to increase the humidity in a storage environment that should be dry. And you can expect that you're going to have some rotting and mold, and that those seeds are in many cases going to be useless. So really be careful about that. If you're harvesting seeds from an environment that's already wet, like tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers, you've got to follow that process. You need to take the seeds, make sure they have plenty of time to dry before you put them into storage. And that's another reason why I like to use the paper envelopes, because even if there's a little bit of moisture left in those seeds, the paper in the envelope can really help out with that drying of the seed. If you store them a little bit too early, it's better to store them in a paper envelope than it is in a plastic or glass jar. When we are collecting those seeds from a wet fruit, look at this seed environment in particular. So for instance, pepper seeds. When you open up a pepper seed, the inside of the pepper, whether it's a sweet pepper or a chili pepper, it's going to have that seed at the top of the pepper. And the seeds are already exposed to air. They're not dry yet, but it's a simple matter of just cutting open the pepper and then just plucking out those seeds and putting them on a sheet to dry. But when you're harvesting something from a squash or the cucumber or the tomato, that's a wet environment to start with. And many of those seeds actually have like a little gelatinous barrier around it. Look at the cucumber seed, look at the tomato seed. You can actually see that the seed is resting inside of even more moisture. You've got to get rid of that. And so that's why typically we're fermenting those kind of seeds. And I've got videos on this, of course. What you do, tomato seeds are the classic example. You take your tomato seeds, you just scrape them right out of the tomato, you put them into a cup or a jar or a bowl, add a little bit of water, and swish it around. Come back the next day and swish it around again. And usually on the third day, sometimes on the second day, you'll start getting mold developing. The fermentation process has started with those seeds. And so that nutrient-rich gel that is surrounding the seeds is being released, and the mold just loves it, starts growing on it. At that point, you just rinse off the seeds and now spread them out on a sheet of newspaper. And you'll noticeably see the difference between a seed that didn't go through that process with one that did. You want to try to save the seeds that have been cleaned, that no longer have that gel. A lot of those gels actually have an anti-germination effect. That's why when you buy a tomato or grow your own tomato and cut it open, the seeds have not germinated yet. It's because they're covered with that gel. It isn't until they fall from the plant and they rest on the ground and they're exposed to the sun and the conditions. And internally, that same process happens with tomatoes that you just throw out into your garden beds. They're going to get moldy. That gelatinous material is going to break down, and then the seeds are going to germinate. You can just hasten the process by cleaning them in the beginning. So consider that when you are storing or collecting your seeds. Now, I will say one thing, and I mentioned it earlier. You need to make sure that the seeds are mature. You need to make sure that the fruit that you're collecting the seeds from is fully ripe. And many of the fruits that we are harvesting haven't reached that point. And cucumbers are a perfect example. In almost all cases, we are harvesting cucumbers while they are still young. If you harvest a nice, slender, green cucumber and cut it open and spoon out some of those seeds to save, they're probably not going to be viable. Maybe a couple, but it's not a good way to save seeds. Cucumbers that are left on the plant to fully ripen are going to turn yellow. They're going to get big and bulky and not look like a cucumber at all. That is a ripe cucumber fruit. That's the one you should be saving your seeds from. And especially at the end of the season, as you're cleaning up your garden, almost all of us have encountered that ugly, big, yellow, gnarly cucumber that was left on the plant that we didn't even know was there. And so it didn't get harvested. That's the one you harvest your cucumber seeds from. And it's the same with squashes. Leave the squash on the plant as long as possible to ensure that you have full viability. Now, the squashes will also change color. There are some squashes that we will harvest young to use. Zucchini, for instance, the zucchini will harvest when it's 5 or 6 inches and slender because it's so sweet. You want to collect the zucchini seeds from that big 10-pound zucchini that stayed on the plant all season long. It'll probably still be that same basic green color, but that's where you collect your seed from. Bettina's asking, I have some seeds or have some little onions not worth eating. Can I save them to use as sets next spring? If so, how do I store them effectively? Oh yeah, absolutely. You can store them. And it's the same, cool, dry, dark environment. And that's why when we are buying our sets from the nurseries in spring, those sets look so bad and so dried out, is because that's probably what they did. They just put them into a cool, dark warehouse somewhere over the course of the winter and then pulled them out in February to sell. And so you can do the same thing. I would recommend that you not store them in a bunch, have them individually stored so that there's some airflow. And it's the same with bulbs. If you're saving any bulb that you are digging up in fall to put back in the ground in spring, it's the same basic idea. And so sand, moist sand is actually an environment that a lot of gardeners use to store the bulbs that they collected in fall. Cardboard box with newspaper is a great way to store some of those. And then just keep an eye on it. If it looks like they're really desiccating, you can spritz them a little bit with water just to help the bulb from drying out completely. But yeah, you can collect those little onion bulbs and save them over the course of the winter, just like other bulbs that you might be saving for flowers that you'll be putting into the ground in the springtime as well. Liz G says, to gather seeds from biennials like carrots, do you leave carrot plants in the ground over winter and hope they flower next year? Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what you do. And so for carrots, for beets, for onions, for all of those biennial vegetables that we're growing in the garden, you leave them in the ground. Absolutely. Harvest the ones that you want to use, but then leave others behind. And in my onion video, I talk about it. And I have a video on saving carrot seeds specifically. And I think in that video is 6 or 7 years old now. No doubt that it's going to be posted by Jay here pretty quickly. You don't need to save a lot of those plants in the ground to get a lot of seeds. I did a rough bit of multiplication for that video. And if you read the comments, you'll see people who have actually done the complete math. But a single carrot that produces the flowers the next year will have hundreds of thousands of seeds. It's incredible how many seeds can grow from a single carrot. And so in that video, I think I had 3 carrots that I had left in the ground over the winter. And then the next year I harvested those seeds, buckets of seeds, tons of seeds from just a couple plants. So leave them in the ground over winter. They should flower the next year. And the key is that when you leave those plants in the ground, roots primarily, when we're talking the carrots and the beets and the biennials like that, leave them in the ground. Don't harvest them to eat, because once they've spent that extra winter and then in spring they start growing their flower stalk, they're going to be so woody. They're not going to taste like you think they should. And it's a waste of effort to even attempt. So the whole point of leaving those plants in the ground is to save seeds, not to have an extra harvest the following year. And it can actually work pretty well. It's one of those things that if you get on that 2-year cycle with your carrots, in addition to the onions and anything else you're growing, you can have so many seeds to give away at seed swaps that now all of a sudden it's like the zucchini that you have to leave on the doorstep of your neighbor. You just have so many seeds that you don't know what to do with them. So you'll learn that just a couple plants is all you really need to focus on. And you can even have a bed. I did this once, and it actually works pretty well. Is set aside a bed, and it doesn't need to be a full-size bed. Have a small bed. That is your seed bed. And in that bed, you put your beetroot and your carrots and spinach and all the other biennial plants. Grow those in that bed for the purpose of leaving in the bed over the winter and then the next season harvesting. And it's no different than like if you were planting garlic at this time of year and then you're harvesting next June. Instead, you're starting your seeds this year. They're growing next year, and then it's the second season. So yeah, that bed had 2 full seasons of dedicated growth, but it's like any other long-term plant. You just set aside the space and let it go, and then when they're ready, you deal with them. So hey, Tony, Simplified Gardening says, always evaluate what does well and save seed from the best plants if possible. Thank you for seconding that notion. It's unless you're experimenting. So I've got that video I did last year on landrace gardening, where you're intentionally allowing seeds to cross-pollinate, and you don't know what you're going to get. So you're saving seeds to experiment. Unless you are intentionally experimenting with your seed saving, yeah, Tony and I, listen to us, save the seeds from the ones that you know are doing best in your garden, and you're more likely to have more success with it. Jana McGregor's asking, how important is it to pick seeds completely dry, even if I dry them after I've had poor luck that way? And so I know I'm just trying to catch up. I'm about 20 minutes behind, 15 minutes behind in my comments, it looks like. But I think it's very important. So I've got a video coming out, I think this week, where I talk about bean seeds. And so I've saved the bean seeds. When you let the bean seeds that are in the pods on the plant dry completely on the plant, you are almost guaranteed germination. Those seeds are going to be viable, and they're already mostly dry. So there isn't much more drying you need to do before they go into storage. If you harvest seed pods while they're still green and then open them up, those seeds inside are also still going to be green, and they're not going to turn into viable seeds that you can plant. They're going to dry out, and it's going to be mushy and raw, and you're going to have to throw them away because the mold developed on them. When you harvest a green pod, you're going to, or you should be eating that pod that you are harvesting, and you should be eating what's inside. So it is important to try to leave those pods, anything that you're trying to harvest for seeds, as long as possible on the plant so that you know it's mature. Now, for many plants, if the process is mostly mature and you have to harvest before it's fully mature, you can still expect some viability. So tomatoes and peppers are a good example of this. If you harvest a tomato or a pepper before they have completely changed color, but they have started changing colors, and so a red tomato is mostly red or mostly pink, some of those seeds should be viable. And the same with a pepper. If you harvest a pepper when it's green, don't expect those seeds to be viable. But if it's started to change color, if it's starting to turn orange but not fully red yet, then you might get some viability in those seeds. Don't expect 100% viability, but you should be able to sow 50 seeds and maybe half of them will be viable. Maybe more, maybe less. It all depends on how far along those seeds are and how mature they are. But when you are harvesting too early, even if you are able to dry them, don't expect that they're really going to be suitable for putting out into the garden. Okay, let's see. I've already answered that question, and I'm going to try to catch up just to make sure that we are all on the same page. Gina, I think that's a good point. Be aware that letting a cuke go yellow-orange will kill the vine. Its job is done. Wait until season end. Yeah, I mentioned this in that video that I did about cucumbers and how to get the biggest and best cucumber harvest. I specifically mentioned that if you let that cucumber develop on the vine, you're not going to get a harvest after that point. You might get a few, If there were flowers already on that vine and already developing cucumbers, you can expect those to mature and ripen. But you're exactly right. The whole purpose of all these plants we're growing is propagation. All they want to do is produce seeds so that they can have another generation. And that big, gnarly yellow cucumber, that's telling that mother plant its job is done, and it's not going to give you much more harvest. It will continue to grow. It's not going to kill it right away because it's sending all of its energy into that developing cucumber. But once that cucumber is fully ripe, then the vine is going to die. Its job is done. And that's actually a good way to tell when to harvest the cucumber seeds, is to look for the vine that yellow cucumber is on. And when it starts turning brown and dying, it's time to harvest that cucumber to save the seeds. And you can expect the viability on those seeds to really be high, because they're as mature as you can absolutely get. And so Outlier Gardener is asking, is there an efficient way of culling out bugs from seeds that are meant for storage? Sometimes they look alike, and it's really difficult for me to differentiate if they're both tiny. That's a good question, because we want to try to avoid storing our bugs along with our seeds if we can. But this gets to that whole process of putting them on newspapers and letting them dry for a long period of time. If you take your seeds and you're assuming they dry and you put them right into storage, yes, you may be putting some bugs in as well. But when you lay them out, a couple things happen. If the bugs are still alive, you can see them crawling around, and you can squish them, you can remove them. But over time, as those seeds dry on that newspaper, and I say newspaper, you could use wax paper, foil, cardboard, whatever you want to use. But for me, since I get a newspaper, it's easy to use. Butcher paper is a great thing to do. Just spread it on a table and you can spread your seeds out there. Over the course of time, as those seeds dry, those insects have no food, and they're going to dry and die in many cases as well. But I prefer to actually be a little more proactive in the beginning to see movement on that paper, so that I'm not inadvertently bringing any pests into my house to find a home in my houseplants. So that's one way of doing it. You can start this process outdoors. And so as you can see behind me, I get such a dramatic shift of weather that at about the time I'm starting to save seeds, that's about the time that the snows start coming. So I'm collecting my seeds and bringing them indoors, because I don't want to be outside in the cold and snow working with my plants. But if you are in a region that has a much more gradual decrease in your temperatures, go ahead and store the seeds outside initially and let the sun do that initial drying. And that sun is also going to do a pretty good job dealing with some of those pests, because those pests don't want to be exposed to the sun. So they're going to leave, and then you can harvest the seeds with fewer issues. You can also use a mesh screen. And so if you've got a sieve that is suitable for your seeds, depending on the pest you're trying to identify, try to use a colander or a sieve that either will allow the seed to drop through and the pest remains behind, or allows the pest to drop through and the seeds remain behind. So I think in my carrot video, I showed a little bit of that process, how you can use different mesh to grade the seeds and also get rid of some of the chaff. And also it deals with some of those pest issues that you could potentially have before you go into storage. And yes, it is a good idea to get the pests out before you put them into storage. John C. says, I saved some dahlia seeds from a Tahiti sunrise dahlia. Do they come true, or could they be different from the parent due to cross-pollination? So good question. And I meant to say this when I was talking about the landrace gardening, but I'll say it now. I'm not familiar with the Tahiti Tahiti sunrise dahlia specifically, but so many of the flowers we grow in our landscape that we have bought from either a seed producer or a nursery, they're hybrids. That's why they're so beautiful. That's why they're so big. That's why they do so well, is because they've been developed for whatever the attribute is that we want from that plant. So many, many times those plants that we're growing are hybrids. I would guess that the Tahiti sunrise dahlia is probably a hybrid. And so that you can definitely save seeds from any plant in your landscape. If you are saving seeds from a plant you know to be a hybrid, those seeds are not going to grow true to the parent plant. You will probably get a plant. There's just no telling what that plant is going to look like. It's not going to look exactly like the parent flower that you harvested those seeds from. So be aware of that. It's not necessarily a bad thing. That's why the landrace gardening is such a popular thing to do in your garden. As those seeds grow into plants the next year and then fruit, it's a whole new flower and a whole new fruit and a whole new generation of seeds. And until you grow it, you really don't know what you're going to get. I've mentioned this before with the sun gold tomato. The first year I was at the Galileo garden, we had no money, no budget, but we had some seeds that were donated, and sun gold were some of the seeds that were donated. And they grew. We harvested delicious sun gold tomatoes, and a lot of those tomatoes fell to the ground, but we harvested the sun golds and saved the seeds, knowing they were a hybrid plant and we were going to get something different. But we needed seeds, we needed to grow plants, and it was an experiment to see what happened. The next year, those sun gold second generation plants were not at all like a sun gold. So I think I grew probably 12 to 15 of those plants. So we took the sun gold seeds, fermented them, saved them, started them indoors, had the plants, and then put the plants in the garden, and then waited for the fruit. Some of the fruit was small and red. Now, sun gold is a cherry tomato, pretty average sized cherry tomato. It's got an orange color to it. One of the plants had very small red fruit on it. Another plant had very small yellow fruit on it. Another plant had very small orange fruit on it. One had a pretty good cherry-sized tomato that was red. None of them were cherry-sized tomatoes that were orange, that looked like a sun gold. And none of them tasted good. The flavors were really bad across the board from all of those seeds that we grew. So be aware that what you're going to get is not going to be like the parent, but you never know. You might come across something that actually does pretty well. And so when you save the plants from your garden, whether they're dahlias or squashes or tomatoes, just be aware of whether they have that hybrid nature to begin with. Also be aware that the seed may be the result of cross-pollination. If it's a squash, you've got a very high likelihood of cross-pollination if you're growing more than one kind of squash. So if you're growing Black Beauty zucchini, for instance, a plant I love, if it's the only squash plant you're growing, feel comfortable saving those seeds. It's going to be a Black Beauty zucchini. But if you're growing a Black Beauty zucchini and pretty much any other type of squash in your garden, and then you save the seeds, there's no telling what you're going to get. Now, not all winter squashes are going to cross-pollinate with all summer squashes, but you can pretty much just make a general guideline that squashes are going to cross-pollinate each other. And unless you do that little bit of research to find out if they are different species, you can understand that a hybrid is going to result the next year. Growing two types of squashes together, they're not going to influence each other in that first growing year. It's not going to affect the size, the color, the taste, but the cross-pollination that causes a seed to develop, that seed is going to have genetics from both parents. And that is going to create a hybrid the next season. And it may be a wonderful plant that develops that next season, but you just don't know for sure. So, especially if you're new to gardening, I would suggest trying to collect the seeds from plants that you know aren't hybrid and that you know haven't been cross-pollinated, so that in the next year, whatever you plant is going to grow into what you expect it to be. Once you get a little more experience, experiment a little bit. Go ahead and do that landrace gardening concept. Go ahead and plant expecting to get a hybrid. Go ahead and plant hybrid or seeds from hybrid parents and see what happens. And it can be fun. It really is kind of fun when you end up with something that doesn't look like anything you've ever seen before and probably doesn't taste like anything you've seen before. In very few situations, it looks good and it tastes good, and you can collect those seeds for the next season. There's no guarantee that the next year it's going to be the same results, but if you do it long enough, over a course of multiple generations, 7 generations is usually what's recommended, the genetics will stabilize, and you may have developed your own type of squash by accident. It can actually be a lot of fun. There's the video that Jay has linked to. Thank you for that. And it can be a lot of fun. It really is interesting, the results sometimes. And if you got the space, especially if you don't know what to do with the space in a bed, it's one of those things that have fun with it and try some of those things. Shandy's Garden is asking, in your opinion, on not spending it on organic seeds, since we can grow the new plant organically ourselves, I'm assuming it's not important. Oh, so when we talk about organic seeds, so when you compare two seeds, and so let's say it is a green bean seed. One is a green bean seed. What Kentucky Wonder, I think, is a green bean seed. So we got Kentucky Wonder green beans. We buy them from the cardboard stand at Walmart, and they're not organic. Or we go to our nursery or online, buy the Kentucky Wonder bean seeds that are certified organic. We put them in our garden side by side. You won't be able to tell which plant is which because they both are the same type of plant. When you get organic seeds, it's a process that the seed grower followed to produce those seeds. The parent plant was raised using certified organic methods from a certified organic grower. That's the only difference. The genetics of the seeds you can expect to be identical. So there's nothing wrong with buying non-organic seed exclusively or buying organic seed exclusively. It's just the process that those seed producers followed in growing their plants. And there are a lot of small seed producers out there that just have not been certified organic that are following organic practices. It's still producing the same seed, whatever the variety is that you want to do. So in my opinion, I don't spend extra on organic seed purely because I want to buy organic seed. And organic seed typically is going to cost more than basic seed. So if there's just a basic plant I want to grow and I can find it cheaper, I get it cheaper. Now, that being said, there are some seed producers that I really like to support, some small organizations, some small companies, and they grow organically. And so if it's one of those small seed producers that I'm trying to support and they're only selling organic seed and it's a variety that I want, then yeah, I'll support from a business perspective their company, not just because it's organic seed. So that's kind of how I look at it. Is I really look at what it is I want and who's selling it and whether it needs to be organic or not. So if it's a seed variety, and I like tomatoes, for instance, and so it's tomato seeds that I'm growing, and I got a choice of getting it from one of the big commercial growers that is selling millions of seed packets a year, or getting it from that small mom and pop operation. I generally am going to get it from the small mom and pop operation. But if the small mom and pop operation is not selling the seed I want, and I only find it at a non-organic source, then I'll buy it from a non-organic source. For me, because I have reached that point where I am looking for specific varieties of plants, that's kind of the approach I take. If you are at the store, and you'll see this even at Walmart, even at all the home centers in spring, when you've got burpee seeds laid out by the hundreds, and you've got 2 packets side by side, and it's the same variety of seed, and one's labeled as organic, all that's telling you is that the seed source grew those mother plants certified organic. Doesn't mean that there's going to be any difference in the outcome of the plants you grow. It's going to be the same. Now, and this I think is probably the most important part of the discussion. I believe that home gardens should be as organic as possible. We're not going to be certified organic, but we can follow the same basic methods, avoiding those petrochemicals in our garden, trying to encourage a balance with nature. I've talked about this so many times that it's my philosophy. It's how I do it every year. So my garden is organic. The process is an organic method. So when I save my seeds by following basically the same method that a certified organic grower would use, then my seeds are organic. They're not certified organic, but they've been grown the same way as a certified grower would grow them. And I know that. So when I save my seeds, I know that they're coming from healthy plants with that philosophy of not incorporating any of those synthetic materials into the garden. That's just how I choose to do it. That's your choice as well. If you've got that basic philosophy, then buying organic seeds and then saving those seeds after you've grown those plants following those organic methods will help sustain your basic philosophy. And that's kind of how I look at the whole methods of gardening, is to follow the methods so that I feel comfortable with the products that I'm growing and then the seeds I'm saving. Scotty Orange, thank you for that. Always enjoy your content. Thanks. You are very welcome. And I appreciate the support from the channel. It's always nice to see that support. And of course, it's always nice to be able to have all of you on here today. So thank you for that. Don't see you often in the comments. So I'm glad you are with us, and I'm glad you're participating. That's wonderful. Okay, let's see. I see some comments about a question from Shandy's Garden. I'm not sure what that question was, but I'm going to scroll down. I guess it was all about the organic growing. Okay, good. I want to make sure I didn't miss something on it. And then there's a video link from Jay from my GMO hybrid heirloom organic seed video and understanding the differences. And so I will say, and this is one of my little personal pet peeves. There are a number of companies out there, and it really annoys me when it's a big seed company that advertise non-GMO, and then they'll put their seed packets out and they'll put non-GMO on the seed packet, and they'll charge more for non-GMO seeds. Well, until this year, with the new purple tomato that has been developed, but until this year, none of the garden seeds that you have access to are GMO seeds. It's just not done. And so it's starting to be done. This was the first time this year, but this is one of those, I just don't believe in fear tactics and trying to get people to buy something because they're afraid of something. You got no reason to be afraid of GMO seeds because you can't buy GMO seeds at Walmart or the home centers or your nursery. It's just not going to happen. And so for a company to advertise non-GMO and then charge you for it, I think is really taking advantage of the gardener, because most gardeners are afraid of growing GMOs in their garden. And they're afraid that the seeds that aren't listed the same way are GMO seeds. Don't be afraid of that. Don't be afraid of that. It's not going to happen. Now, 10 years from now, that may change. And there may be more GMO seeds on the market. And if that is a concern of yours, then it becomes more important. And most of the seed producers have signed the non-GMO pledge that if GMO seeds are developed, they're not going to sell them. That's wonderful. And I applaud that as well if you are concerned about getting GMO seeds in the future. But for now, don't be worried about it. And don't pay extra for a seed that's labeled non-GMO, because I can guarantee you the other seed is also non-GMO. So it's the same as that organic labeling. There are some producers who are charging you more just because they have that label on it. It's more appropriate for the organic label because it is more expensive to grow the seeds organically. But the non-GMO, I would not pay extra for a non-GMO seed because I know that its partner right next to it on the seed stand is also non-GMO. So something to be afraid of. Yeah, Tony's right. GMOs are only sold in bulk. It's not sold in little packets. It's the agricultural industry. It is corporate agriculture that is developing the GMO plants, and they're developing it for very specific purposes. And I talk about it. I have another video, not the one that Jay had linked, but a different video on GMO and the truth behind the GMO. And it's a very small percentage of plants being grown, and it's pretty much exclusively in that industrial agriculture scale. And as Tony says, they are being sold in bags that are 50-pound bags of seeds. That's how they're selling GMO seeds. They're not being developed or packaged for the home gardener, with the exception of that one purple tomato that was developed this year. So just be aware of that. And of course, in the gardener community, as new plants are developed and if a new GMO appears, no doubt you will definitely be hearing about it. Eva Nichols Art, thank you for that. Thanks, Gardener Scott, sharing all your knowledge and insights. You've greatly helped me with gardening in my very short season garden and working with nature. I thank you for that. Yeah, Truckee, California has a very short growing season. And it's, those of us who have that challenge of living at altitude in the mountains with short seasons can really console each other when it comes to the early snows and all those other things. So it's fun when we have those kind of things that we can share with gardening. That's one of the things I think gardening is so fun, is when we can share our hardship stories with others who appreciate what those hardships are. Even if you don't have that same hardship, you can still appreciate as a gardener what some of the rest of us maybe have to deal with. Okay, let's see. Deb C says, thank you, Gardener Scott, for entertaining me while I clean the whole house. You made the project a whole lot easier. I'm glad I could help. You know, this is a live stream and not a bad podcast, but I do try to approach most of this like I would a podcast, because that's what I do when I'm cleaning or doing those chores outside, is I'll listen to a podcast, and it definitely does make the whole process go a little bit easier and faster. So I'm glad I could help out. Outlier Gardener's asking, if you buy non-organic seeds, is there a chance that those seeds carry on chemicals that the mother was treated with? Extremely unlikely. Now, I have seen a little bit of research, or not even actual research, but the results of some studies that talk about some residual chemicals if the fields were sprayed and the seeds were developing when the fields were sprayed. So, for instance, a field is sprayed with a pesticide and seeds were developing at that time. It's possible that there could be some pesticide residue on those seeds. But the thing that I think is most concerning for us as gardeners is not so much the pesticide residue, possibly an herbicide residue, but by the time those seeds have been packaged and stored and transported and bought, and you put them into the ground, the likelihood of any chemicals on those seeds is extremely, extremely low. And I would say consider it unlikely. As far as the mother plant being sprayed before the seeds developed, then you're not going to have any residue at all. You shouldn't expect it on the seeds, especially anything that was growing in a pod or inside the fruit. So tomato seeds are not going to have that issue. Bean seeds are not going to have that issue. It's possible on some of those flower seeds that that were harvested, but not from any fruit seeds. So I wouldn't worry about that at all. There is some concern, and this kind of ties in with what is carried from the mother to the seed. It's not going to be the chemicals, and it's not going to be how the plant was grown, but it could be disease. There are some diseases that can be transferred from the mother plant to the seed. So if you have plants in your garden that have diseases, those are not the plants to collect the seeds from and then save those seeds the following year. It's not all diseases. It's very specific diseases from very specific plants, but there are some plants that can pass disease to the seeds, but you're not going to have chemicals that were fed to the plant, fertilizers that were fed to the plant. Those aren't going to be transferred to the seeds. So I wouldn't worry about that at all. I've never worried about that. And I haven't seen anything that says any of those synthetic chemicals are being transferred over the course of the propagation method. But I have seen stuff about the diseases, and that's why I would be careful about those kind of things. If you want to save the seeds in your garden, save from the healthiest plants, the biggest plants, the most productive plants, the plants that tasted the best. Those are the seeds that you want to be saving. And if it didn't work well in your garden, then why would you want to save the seeds anyway? But avoid that kind of stuff, and hopefully you'll have the success that you really hope for. And Jay, you've been so wonderful today, putting up all these different links to all these different videos. There's the link on how to collect pepper seeds and never buy seeds again. I've got a whole bunch of seed videos. I've got a cilantro seed. I've got spinach seed, I've got onion seed, I've got carrot seed, I've got pepper seed, I've got tomato seeds. I've got the guerrilla gardening where I use the seed balls. I show how to make the seed balls. I got a bunch of videos on seeds, saving the seeds. Got a whole bunch of videos on storing the seeds. And so today I wanted to focus most on collecting the seeds and how to choose what you wanted to collect, because I've got all those other videos that talk about the storing and the germinating and then growing them. And even though I've got a lot of seed collecting videos, I don't have everything yet. But the basic concepts and the basic foundation for collecting the seeds stays pretty consistent. And if you've got a bunch of seeds, I was actually thinking about this a couple days ago when I was trying to come up with the topic today. I've got so many seed packets, and I know the viability is decreasing on a lot of those seeds. So particularly the flower seeds, because I've got dozens and dozens and dozens of perennial and annual flower seeds that are years old now. I don't know the viability. I got the seed packet. I grew the plant. I put the plant in my garden. So for instance, all my purple coneflower, all my echinacea, I grew from seed and then put the plant in. The same with the rudbeckia, the same with all the other flowers I'm growing in my pollinator garden. I started all those plants from seed. Now that they're producing flowers and seeds themselves, those are the seeds that I collect and spread throughout my garden. But I still have those packets of seeds from years ago. I think what I'm going to do, kind of what I was talking about towards the beginning of the show, is just put all of those seeds into a bag, mix them up, and then just spread them outside. They might end up as bird food. They might end up as worm food. They might end up growing in the garden, but they're not doing any good stored in one of my storage bins for seeds, because I'm already saving newer versions of those seeds. If you get on that cycle of saving seeds, do something with those old seeds and spread them throughout your landscape to help as a food source for those animals that need it as a food source, or maybe to generate some new plants that might pop up in the spring. I love it when I get new plants pop up in an area that didn't have the plants before. And that can be started by just taking some of those old seeds and throwing them out in your garden and then hoping for the best. And you never know. It might be one of those kind of things that is destined to fill up a space in your garden. Now, I'm seeing some comments about the background today. So this is my garden that I took this morning at about 7:30. It's overcast. It was snowing a little bit. It was cold. Not, cold is a relative term. So when I took this picture, it was about 34 degrees Fahrenheit, about 1 degree Celsius. Didn't put a jacket on, just walked out with my camera and took pictures, because here in Colorado, that's not particularly cold. Then it started getting windy and I got cold, and so I came inside. But I just wanted to show this picture because I like to show different periods of my garden. And typically the first live stream of each month, I like to show my garden just as kind of a calendar of the gardening year. And so all of my plants now, all my squash, all my tomatoes, all my peppers, they've all been killed by cold temperatures. The snow wasn't enough to kill a lot of these plants, but the cold overnight temperatures have been cold enough. And also just to kind of give you an idea of what I'll be doing in the days ahead. When the sun comes back again and when it warms up again, these are some of my fall time activities, is cleaning up these beds. And if I discover that gnarly cucumber, I'll save the seed from it. Now, I've already gleaned all the fruit that is in my garden, but this is one of those kind of things where sometimes you don't discover a seed source until this time of year, when all the plants are dying back and you see what was underneath the plant all along. And so get out, even when it's cold and snowy, and take a look in your garden, because you may find one of those seed sources that you weren't expecting. And my petunias and my pansies are beginning to fade because of that really deep cold. And so I'm collecting those seeds, like I mentioned in the beginning. So there's still a lot to do at this time of year in the garden before you get everything cleaned up. And I'll cover all those beds with mulch. And I still have a little bit of amending. I've amended a lot of the beds already, but still got a little bit of work to do. And that's what I'm going to be doing over the course of the next couple of weeks. Not this week, because we've got a lot of snow and a lot of cold. So beginning tomorrow afternoon and running through Saturday morning, Saturday at about noon. So we're talking Tuesday night, all day Wednesday, all day Thursday, all day Friday, and Saturday morning. For me here in Colorado, it is not going to get above freezing. It's going to be freezing temperatures for 4 days. That's why I'm not going to be outside doing much work, because I don't know about you, but I've been enjoying the warm weather and all the garden activities, and I'm just going to kind of live with those memories until they start coming back again. It'll warm up enough for me to get outside, but not this week. So this is a good week to listen to podcasts and clean the house and do those kind of things. Absolutely. Outlier Gardener, thank you so much for that. Thank you to everyone for another informative live. You are very, very welcome, and I do appreciate it. I do want to give a shout out to Karen from my garden club, who made a comment this week that she was catching up on some of my videos. And I do appreciate that, not just from people I know, of course, but from everybody. I do appreciate at this time of year, like a week with the temperatures never rising above freezing, I'm going to be spending a lot of time catching up on some of the channels that I like, catching up on some of those videos. And so I appreciate it when any of you are catching up on some of my videos so that you can see what's happening in the Gardener Scott garden and the Gardener Scott community, and maybe help yourself along in the process of becoming a better gardener. If you're not collecting seeds, do it. Get out there, start this year, and see where it takes you. Before you know it, you'll be like me with lots of bags on lots of envelopes and lots of jars of seeds. And then you got to figure out what to do with them because you've got so many. I think that's a nice problem to have. Appreciate you being here. Appreciate you dealing with the time change. I think we've all caught up, and most of us are on the same time now. Even those of you in Europe have already changed. So it's great that we can start our weeks this way. And I'll be back next week, of course, to do it all over again. I appreciate all of you so much, and I look forward to seeing you then. Have a great gardening week, and of course, enjoy gardening. I'll see you then.